when you start looking at Chargers, Eagles, you look at Bears, Bills. This is where you start looking at teams that are like could be true contenders next year and don't really have too many needs. Now, for the Chargers, I do think they're in a great position, obviously, with the NFL. Obviously, I am a little biased, but they're a team that made the playoffs last year that has a franchise quarterback that has the most cap space in the NFL. They have over $100 million in cap space. It's absolutely ridiculous. And again, their biggest need is obviously offensive line, but I think they're just shoring that up by getting healthy. When you look at, again, they have two all-pro tackles that didn't play last year. That's why that was a huge glaring hole for them. But they're coming back. I do think they do need to add another piece to this offensive line, but I don't have them going offensive line here because I do think, again, with them having the most cap space and them having that Harbaugh connection, I do really think the Chargers are going to be the top suitor for Tyler Lindenbaum. Obviously, I do think the Giants are obviously in the market for him as well with that Harbaugh connection. But I do think that's what the Chargers are going to do because they do have the most cap space. Now I'm kind of thinking like, hey, the Chargers could do something pretty fun. I do think their offense, again, they kind of did something fun last year with Omarion Hampton. But Omarion Hampton, I do kind of want to see how he pans out because, again, it wasn't just the ideal year for him. Obviously, his offensive line was arguably the worst in the league, so it was hard for him to run behind. And then also at the same time, he was injured last year. So I do have him going something fun again. I don't want them going receiver because I do think, again, they went Ryan McConkey. They went Quentin Johnson in recent years. So I don't have him going receiver, but I do have him going pass catcher. I like Kenyon Sadiq. Now, again, a lot of people may be questioning because of Gadsden. Obviously, he had that hot start. I'm not really a believer in Gadsden. Again, maybe it could be a complementary piece to this offense. But I do think Kenyon Sadiq, now you're looking at a guy that could be like a true elite tight end prospect. When you look at him playing for Oregon, there were times last year where he had to really run protect. So he could be an extension of this offensive line blocking. Then when you look at his physical capability and when you look at him on the field, like he's an absolute monster. He's shredded. I do believe he's way too big for secondary players to guard him. And I think, again, he's too fast for linebackers to guard him. I think this is a perfect, fun pick for the Chargers. And I do think the Chargers are at the state, which is the biggest thing for these type of picks, where they have the luxury to make a pick like this. I think Kenyon Sadiq is a great option for them. Again, I do think they're going to address the pass catching to some extent because, again, even though they do have the secondary receivers in Quentin Johnson, who I really do believe in, he just has to be more consistent. And they also have Ladd McConkey as well as a pass catcher. That I don't think is ever necessarily going to be like a top-end wide receiver one just because of his limitations, obviously, with size and stuff. And his ability to eat in the slot is phenomenal, but I don't know how he ever is going to transition to the outside. I think, again, add another pass catcher, again, pairing him up with your franchise quarterback and Justin Herbert, I think is just like the pick that the Chargers can make here.
Yeah, I like the Oregon connection too. Him going to the same college as Herbert as well. Yeah, I mean Gadsden had like that, 2 to 3 game stretch where he was pretty good, but then kind of fell off, had some, drops in games. And yeah, I mean, I like it, and they're in a great spot. You got Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater both coming back. Maybe you still, address the interior of the offensive line. You mentioned that if they get Lindenbaum, the center, over from the Ravens, either him or the Giants, I would love that for the Giants too, for Dart. So they could do that. I could still see them, addressing it in this draft as well, getting more depth because that offensive line just got ravaged with injuries this past season. That had a lot to do with their playoff performance against the Patriots too. So, and obviously Justin Herbert took way too many hits, and you don't want that happening with your franchise quarterback. So I do like that. Add another pass catcher for Herbert. But they got a lot of flexibility with the cap space, like you mentioned that they have.
So now we get into pick 23, and at pick 23, again, Eagles kind of another team, not that many needs. I guess you could go an edge rusher or a guard. I don't really, again, they're not really going to go tight end. Obviously, if Kenyon Sadiq just got picked right in front of them, maybe they're a team that could make that move possibly. We could look at that again, depending on what each team does in the offseason. But I have them going with Avion Terrell, brother of A.J. Terrell, going to them. Again, Eagles are a team with not a lot of needs, but I feel like they also hit like this kind of like plateau this season. They were a team that we thought was going to be again a front end line for a Super Bowl contender, and I feel like they never really hit their stride all throughout the year. Again, it's kind of ironic with how good their record was, and they were obviously a division winner. But again, I feel like they kind of hit this plateau. It's going to be very interesting what they do. You talked about it in our last podcast. They could definitely go receiver if again AJ Brown does get traded, but that's going to be something that we're going to need clarity to after free agency, and that's going to come with our second mock draft. We will know definitely more about their team needs if they have that team need at receiver. But Avion Terrell, again, I do feel like these Clemson players are getting undervalued in this draft. Obviously, has a great pedigree in the family, and I do think they could use work in the secondary. I think it's a solid.
Yeah, I mean, also offensive line could potentially be an area they address because it's possible that you could see maybe two of their cornerstones on the line retire. I know I saw an article that, possibly Landon Dickerson and Lane Johnson might retire, which would be two huge losses. And obviously, losing Jason Kelsey to a couple years before that to retirement, even though, I mean, they did win the Super Bowl last year, but still, that offensive line that's kind of been one of their areas where, they've been a solid unit. They could be losing two more key pieces. So maybe that's something that they could do. I know we mentioned it yesterday and you just mentioned it now, potentially if AJ Brown departs, going with another playmaker on the offensive side of the ball. So, yeah, I could see, maybe either offensive line or, secondary. I don't mind that. Maybe adding another edge rusher to the fold as well. They could do that. But yeah, it's going to be interesting what kind of offseason and how it shapes out for the Eagles.
Now we get into pick 24. Now, we said if you go all the way back, obviously to the beginning of this episode, we said the Browns could go either receiver or offensive line. Those are their two positions of need. Obviously, their defense is good. We look at it, hey, like their defense is one of the best units, and they definitely need help on this offense a little bit. But again, the team could definitely ride their defense. But with all the quarterbacks they have in their room, and again, we don't know how it's going to pan out. And if anything, you're going to need to help out these quarterbacks for sure because, again, they are definitely not blue chip talents, and they're definitely all basically their future success is riding on this year. I have them going Caleb Lomu. Again, you're getting a tackle, you're getting a premier position on the line. You're also getting a player from an offensive line that was arguably the best offensive line in college football. Even when they weren't the best team in college football, Utah had this identity of dominating the trenches, and they've done that on a multitude of games with a running quarterback and a really good run game. So I like Caleb Lomu. Again, the only thing you could argue with him was he on the opposite side of Spencer Fandler that dictated a lot of success on the offensive line. I do think he's a great player on his own right. He was lined up on the complete opposite side, helping out that unit. I do think, again, offensive line, receiver, weapon is really the only thing the Browns need, which is kind of crazy to say for a team picking at 6. Again, obviously, I need a quarterback. That just isn't going to happen in this draft. Again, at least not in the first round. So I've been going Caleb Lomu.
Yeah, don't have a problem with it. I mean, again, another team that has multiple first round picks. We talked about it already. Defense is in a good spot. The offense is really what they got to try to improve. Whether it's the offensive line with another pass catcher. So don't have a problem with this pick either.
And also, like a thing I wanted to highlight just with that pick in general. Again, who knows what happens with Travis Hunter? Jaguars to trade up a lot of the Browns to get him. Obviously, this first round pick was involved, but again, for a lot of people, again, I was high on the Jaguars, little biased there, but a lot of people weren't. Again, this was a pick that could have definitely ended up being in the top 10. So I think the Jaguars definitely win out by having this really good season. This pick only being at 24. Again, I think the Browns were again hoping for a top end pick that they didn't get. Um, Now we get into 25. Another team that, again, doesn't really have too many needs. I have them going Caden McDonald. I think, again, for them and their needs, I think this was the best player available for them. Obviously, he has a great pedigree coming from Ohio State. But at the same time, they could use defensive line work, I think, for sure. The defense was a little bit suspect at times. I think the biggest thing with Caleb Williams and this Bears team, again, they sure up this offensive line. This offensive line became worse from to really being one of the best units in the NFL. And I don't think they need another weapon by any means because I think they're going to really let the young players that they drafted pretty high in recent years see how those players develop. Obviously, Colston Loveland finished the season strong. Roma Dunze, another guy that got drafted with a top pick. So again, they have those type of players. And again, obviously they can't select a running back here. We're pretty high on Kyle Monogany. We think he could be serviceable for another year along with DeAndre Swift. So again, I think this was definitely a need for them on the defensive side of the ball. They could go different ways though. They could go safety or something, but I had them going Caden McDonald. I think he's the best defensive player available at this pick from what we have at this point.
Yeah, I feel like for the Bears, it's I mean, unless like they do something that we don't expect, but I feel like this is a selection where they go with a defensive player. Um, Defense definitely wasn't. I mean, obviously they did win the division. Caleb Williams, great in year two. I feel like the defense lacked at some points. And I feel like that's an area, that's a side of the ball that does need improvement. Although they did, invest in it. They did bring in some guys on the defensive line. But yeah, I think going with a defensive player, I think that's the right move for them. And if they could shore up the defense, I mean, this is going to be a very good team once again with the Bears going into 2026.
All right, now we get into number 26, and I do believe the Buffalo Bills do win out if this player is there. It's just a question of if he's there. Obviously, you were talking about yesterday how there's a possibility that this player could go to the Eagles just based on what they do with A.J. Brown. So that's going to definitely determine a couple of things. But we were talking about yesterday how we don't think this player is that far off from the receiver selected in the top three. So in the top three of their position. So we're going with Denzel Boston at number 26 of the Buffalo Bills. There's absolutely no doubt that Josh Allen needs a pass catching weapon. I'm not like insanely low in their pass catchers, but they're only secondary pass options at best. Like they're not going to be wide receiver ones. Whether you look at Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, or others, the only reason this has worked is just of how amazing of a quarterback Josh Allen is. But they definitely need a guy that could really be a wide receiver one. When we look at Denzel Boston and why we were so high on him, I believe again very similar to Tethro McMillan last year. I think a lot of things that this guy again is knocked for. I'm not necessarily straight off of him by any means. This guy is a 6'4 receiver that produced double-digit touchdowns, 20-plus touchdowns in 2 seasons. So, again, he does have that red zone capability. Not only that, a lot of people are saying that he's going to run a slow time, whether it's a 4.47 or, again, 5.2 time. But I think Denzel Boston, again, if you show the ability to get open at his size, I think he does. I think, again, there is no need to worry about how fast the player is. Again, we talked about how that notion, again, whether we look at Jackson the Jigba or other receivers, again, if you have the ability to get open, the speed shouldn't necessarily be that much of a factor to stray you off a receiver. Not only that, for this receiver at 6'4" to have the ability to play inside and outside, I think is absolutely huge. You don't see that again in the recent NFL, so I think that what makes him unique as well. A guy that could play all three receiver positions, and this is just a perfect fit for the Buffalo Bills. It's just if he's going to be there, this pick, if they're going to have to trade up for him, whatever the case may be. I absolutely love Denzel Boston at this pick.
Yeah, I definitely could see that. The Bills definitely need another pass catcher for Josh Allen. Defense definitely needs some work. I know they did invest on the defensive line last offseason. They brought in Joey Bosa, some other defensive linemen as well. The secondary, I would think, was a huge issue in the postseason as well. Against Denver, a lot of those big plays, a lot of those key third downs where they needed to make stops, guys were wide open. That I think that's another area the Bills need to address there. Obviously, Sean McDermott, sorry, not Doug McDermott. They got Joe Brady now with McDermott being out. It'll be interesting to see if they go more offense now, promoting their offensive coordinator. But pass catcher is definitely something they need to address because, again, last couple of years, you're bringing in Amari Cooper, you're bringing in Brandon Cook, some veteran receivers. They need a true number one receiver back in that offense again. And maybe they still believe in Keon Coleman. I know there was a lot of talk about him after the season, a discrepancy, whether the coaching staff really wanted him, the front office, people getting thrown under the bus for that pick. So, yeah, but I think pass catcher, but the defense definitely needs some work as well.
Now we get into pick number 27. I believe this pick was an absolute home run value-wise. Again, the mocks and everything has him lower than I think he is. I thought he was an absolute game changer for Miami. I thought he was a great partner alongside Ruben Bain. I'm going with Akeem Mesidor at 27 for the San Francisco 49ers. I think this is kind of like exactly what they need. Again, You look at another team very similar to the Bucks. A lot of positions kind of aging out or getting injured. When you look at again their key playmakers on the defensive side of the ball being injured all year long, I think they could definitely use a younger player, especially on the edge, a position of value, to help out this defense a lot. Because again, I don't know how much longer you're going to ride on some of these key playmakers. Just because again, like very similar to the Bucks, they could have a good season next year, the year after, but that's about it. Like this window for a lot of these players in the 49ers are shortening. But I like Akeem Mesidor a lot. Like again, I believe he was an absolute game changer, made arguably the best defensive in college football. What it was, obviously, again, Ruben Bain gets a lot of the shine. Him lined up alongside him, but this guy again, don't be fooled because Ruben Bain was on this defense. Like this guy was also a freak as well.
Yeah, I mean the veteran players they have on the defensive side of the ball. I mean Fred Warner getting hurt. I mean Nick Bosa now has had 2 ACL tears now in his NFL career. They definitely need some more depth at that position on the defensive line. Maybe some secondary help. It's not, the 49ers, they had a very good season, but they're not the same, juggernaut that they were a couple years ago. They still got some good offensive players, obviously, with McCaffrey. Brock Purdy had a good year when he was healthy. But again, they're not that juggernaut that they were from a couple years ago. So they need some more youth on this team. Now with Robert Saleh, taking on the job in Tennessee, new defensive coordinator once again. So, with the healthy Bosa and a healthy Warner next year, obviously that's going to help them. But, you definitely need some more surrounding pieces that can be impactful in case those guys go down again.
Now we get into pick number 28, and as a fan of this team, I have watched him a lot, and I think this player is, again, a really good offense, and I think it's kind of exactly what the team needs. For the Houston, going Emmanuel Pregnant now, again, like you guys are seeing on your screen, he is a little bit lower in the mock than people think, but I do think he's a first-round talent. For Emmanuel Pregnant, obviously coming over from the transfer portal to Oregon, I believe he helped shore up this offensive line for sure. And you also look at an offensive line where he definitely had a ton of work cut out for him. His offensive line, again, whether they were playing a running game, a passing game, they had 3-4 running backs in their cycle. And then also, again, they had a player in Dante Moore that definitely loved to pass the ball as well. I believe him being in like this pro style program would definitely help him going into Houston. Houston definitely needs the offensive line work, no doubt. But at the same time, I kind of believe their offensive line was really bad. And I said this in the beginning of this year when we did a podcast. Like, I don't think you can just like wipe out a whole offensive line and then bring a whole new offensive line in. I do believe there has to be continuity at that position. Again, those players on the offensive line, they definitely weren't premier players. But at the same time, you have to be able to keep one or two players on an offensive line. You can't completely wipe out the unit. When we look at the Texans on defense, obviously we talked about how we were on this defense. This defense was one of the best units in the last 5 years. But I do want to also tell people when you're going into this NFL draft, there is a possibility that Houston does go defense with a high pick. We get it, they were this insane unit, but at the same time, they do have a lot of people to pay on the defense, and I don't think every single one of them is going to get paid. So that also is going to leave some holes on his defense where they could go. I do like their pass catchers. Obviously, they have a need at running back, but that just isn't going to happen at this pick. Emmanuel Pregnant, I think, is the pick here, or just, again, an offensive lineman in general.
Yeah, the offensive line for the Texans has kind of been, shaky. And then they went and traded Laramie Tunsil to the Commanders before the season started, which we all kind of thought was a little bit of a head scratcher. But yeah, I feel like with defense, I mean, have one of the best defenses in the league. Some of the guys, they might not have next year, depending on free agency. So maybe, you address that. But yeah, offensive line, no problem with that area being addressed with their first pick.
Now, this next pick for the Rams, it was a little debate for me. So again, the Rams the last couple of years, a lot of people were thinking they could go quarterback. This would be the perfect spot to take Ty Simpson if they were able to do that. Part of me kind of thinks them taking quarterback. I know they could have a quarterback develop in the system for a year or two, but a lot of people, for me, I kind of just think that's like a rumor that just like is not going to happen because again, this team is constantly contending, and I think they could kind of use pieces that could help them like right now. I have them going Monroe, Freeling again. With a lot of these picks and a lot of these tackles, as you keep going down and down the board, there is more risk if they're going to be like a guaranteed player or not. But Monroe Freeling, I don't really mind at this pick again. They could use a tackle position. Again, the biggest debate for me with this pick was I going to double up and make them go defensive back 2 times, which I think is completely viable. Like we said, they have a ton of holes in the secondary, but I have them going Monroe Freeling again. Matthew Stafford is getting older, and they do need to continue to protect him. Again, this offensive line isn't horrible by any means, but they could use another piece. I like Monroe Freeling here. And again, it could be, again, in Ty Simpson's range if that's just not like a rumor and they do eventually go with a quarterback to back up Matt Stafford one of these years. But again, I know you could agree with this. We've been hearing this 2-3 years in a row now that they were in range of going for a quarterback to back up Matt Stafford, and it just never happens.
Yeah, I mean, we could also see them maybe like trade out of this pick too if somebody wants to trade up and get somebody towards the end of the first round. They did have Havenstein, their right tackle, retire, so adding making a selection to the offensive line, I don't think is a bad choice. And again, you have the older quarterback in Matthew Stafford, so got to protect Stafford by any means necessary. Again, wouldn't be opposed to going 2 players at the same position. You take 2 corners to address the secondary. Don't have a problem with that either. But yeah, again, especially when you have one of these quarterbacks in the twilight of their career, you want to make sure they're protected. So don't have a problem with that.
Now, as we wind things down to like the legit, real Super Bowl contenders, 30, 31, 32 teams that really made it all the way to the end of the season, pretty much. For the Broncos and the Patriots, I do think they're both in very similar spots. I do think they could use an offensive piece. I do think their defenses are truly elite. But unfortunately for the Broncos and the Patriots in this mock draft, I believe once you get past Kenyon Sadiq and Denzel Boston, I don't think any offensive weapons are really worth the first round pick. Again, you see Casey Concepcion in this list. I think you could go Casey Concepcion here, and it is viable. I would just wait for the second round to draft one of these receivers, whether it's a Casey Concepcion, whether it's a Chris Bell, obviously Omar Cooper Jr. you see here. And then we talked about Zachariah Branch yesterday. I think those guys are more second round picks that you're splitting hairs. I wouldn't use a first round value on them. So for the Broncos, even though they do have a pretty insane defense, I did have them going CJ Allen here. Again, he played a part for a great defensive coach in Kirby Smart. I do think he's NFL ready to contribute right now. Obviously, the defensive unit is great, but again, if you just constantly stack this defense could be a juggernaut. And again, they don't really need offensive line help. Again, I guess it says center. You could go center here, but they don't really need offensive line help. And I don't think the playmakers right now are worthy of a first-round pick. Again, if it's going to be anybody, probably going to be.
And the pass catchers that they have aren't that bad either.
Yeah, it could be Casey Concepcion, I guess, but I'm just stacking.
I could see it more so for the Patriots if they went with a playmaker than the Broncos.
Yeah. But I had CJ Allen there. Then we can just go straight into the Patriots at a 31. Very similar spot. I kind of again think their defense is really good, but I do think their defense does have a hole on the edge. Because again, you look at the interior pressure that they were getting throughout this playoffs. Again, they do have great interior defensive linemen, but I do think they have a hole on the edge. I went R. Mason Thomas out of Oklahoma at the edge position. Again, you could see, like you just said, them going wide receiver, but at the same time, I kind of think they're going to be in the market for a receiver that's a little more viable. Like, again, if they can't secure Denzel Burke, I think they're going to go for like a little bit more of established receiver. I heard, again, if they don't get if the Cowboys don't get George Pickens, I think they could be in the market for that. Again, I just don't know if they're or they could be in the trade market for A.J. Brown as well.
I feel like that's probably more likely. I think the Cowboys are probably going to franchise tag Pickens. So, but yeah, A.J. Brown definitely, especially with the Mike Vrabel connection too, that could be an option.
Taking a shot on like somebody that's maybe value isn't there, and I do they have this needed edge, so I went with R. Mason Thomas, but
no, they could definitely do that. Obviously the offensive line struggled in the Super Bowl, so maybe that's where they go as well. But yeah, I don't have a problem with that pick.
And then at number 32, even though again you're looking at another defense that is great, I do believe they're going to have a hole this offseason. So I do go with Brandon Cease here from from South Carolina because Tariq Woolen is a free agent, and then also at the same time, this this defensive unit could use outside cornerbacks, teams that develop into outside corner players that develop into outside cornerbacks. So I do think it's going to be a need. Like I said, I don't think it's going to be a guarantee that they do get Tariq Woolen back. I do think they could use that. But again, you're looking at the Super Bowl champions. You're looking at, again, teams that do have weapons on offense. You're looking at, again, they have their quarterback. They have a great defensive unit. You could really go, again, a lot of different ways with this pick. I have Brandon Teach because, again, I don't know if Tariq Woolen's going to be back.
Yeah, Woolen's a free agent. Kobe Bryant's a free agent, and Josh Jobe is also a free agent too. So that's three guys in your secondary. And we'll see if they bring some of them back. They're probably not bringing all of them back. So, yeah, secondary, that could definitely be a position that they end